Hi guys! Today I want to talk quite briefly about pantheism and animism, and how thinking about animism and a more animistic pantheism has been really helping me to reinvigorate my beliefs, reinvigorate my practices and get myself back into a really strong, stable spiritual outlook. Apologies for the lighting in this video. As you probably know if you've been watching my videos since I moved to Edinburgh, I have struggled ever since moving into this apartment to find a good spot for recording, somewhere that has a relatively nice background, fairly good lighting, and where I can kind of get comfy and just feel comfortable sitting and talking to you. And this is currently the best that I can manage. I know it's not perfect, but in terms of like the light casting shadow on my face, but we'll work with it. So I haven't done an awful lot of reading yet into animism, and I'm not going to get too much into the nitty-gritty of the different philosophies of pantheism and animism in this video, and the different kind of schools of thought and the definitions and things like that. I'm not going to get too much into that in this video because this is something that I might return to when I'm more in that kind of mood to do maybe one of those kind of introductory series videos that I made years ago. I might think of doing something along those lines at some point down the line. But today I really just wanted to riff about pantheism and animism and just some of the thoughts that I've been having recently about my own understanding of divinity and what's been going on with that, and what the thought process is that helped me to really get back into my faith. So I'm going to label this a faith food video because it's all about faith for me. It's all about getting back into not just my practice but my belief, like back into my faith, back into a place where I feel spiritual again, where spiritual practice is organic because it's something that is really bubbling up in me. It's just a reflection of feelings that I'm having, and that has been a big problem for me over the last couple of years, particularly over the last year, is struggling with faith and struggling just to have that sense of being connected to divinity, of seeing the universe as divine, and of just experiencing reverence on a day-to-day basis and being able to tap into a reverential kind of state of mind. So for me right now, animism is providing a kind of microcosmic, important kind of sidekick to pantheism. So pantheism, to my mind, and when I first came to it, and generally speaking, when I think about pantheism, it's quite a big picture. It's this idea that the universe is divine, and quite a lot of the time people who are pantheists or who subscribe to that kind of thinking, quite a lot of the time it's more about the bigger picture cycles and processes of cosmos that are seen to be divine. And I even made a video about this relatively recently, and I'll link that. I'll do that sort of recommended video thing. I can't remember for the life of me what it was called, but I was kind of suggesting that there are certain kind of ways of experiencing cosmos on a very kind of big scale, on a sort of grand scale of interconnectedness, and the bigger processes of creativity and that kind of thing, and that I kind of see them as being more sacred than other things. Anyway, I'll link that video and you can go and check that out if you want to. It's a slightly different point than what I'm making now, but you might be interested in that. But yeah, what really got me going with pantheism in the first instance was the idea that there is something about the grander scale of the universe, its sort of big picture creativity and the kind of vastness of it, the epicness of it, that is divinity, or that is God, goddess. And that kind of thinking is particularly compatible with monotheistic faiths. So a lot of Christians or semi-Christians or ex-Christians will adhere to a kind of pantheistic understanding of God. And it tends to be in that very kind of big picture sense, that they are looking at Christian theology, Christian doctrine, at least roughly speaking, that kind of concept of God, and deciding that rather than God being something that is outside of the universe, that the universe itself is God. But there's still something very transcendent going on there. There's still something about like, well, it's not that every single thing in the universe is God. It's not that I am God, or that desk is God, or that chair is God. It's that its sum is greater than its parts, I think is what I'm trying to say for a lot of pantheists. And this is something that I have gone back and forth about a lot in my own mind, in my own thinking, about divinity, about why it is that I choose to decide to think, to believe that the universe is divine or worthy of being talked about as divinity or as God or goddess. And that kind of thinking has served me quite well. It has really helped me, and particularly in the early stages of my spiritual practice, it really helped me to open my mind up to the bigger picture, because I had spent years not really thinking about questions of the nature of the universe and our role in it and so on, because I'd sort of insulated myself from that kind of thinking for a while in my kind of late teens, early 20s. Coming back to that kind of thinking and re-immersing myself in the awe of the big picture of the universe, of the scale of it, of the just how I might think about its process as a whole. That was really instrumental in tapping into a sense of reverence for me, and it's still important to me to this day. But the problem with that kind of thinking is that it actually is really quite hard to access on a day-to-day basis. It gets a little bit difficult if you get out of that mindset, or if you are going through a spiritual slump, to be in even to be in a green space, even to be somewhere that is more kind of close to nature than our day-to-day urban existence. It's even kind of difficult in that kind of space to really jump through all those hoops in order to get to that place of, oh yes, oh, look at all this beautiful nature, it's all part of this kind of a big picture thing. I think when it's so big scale, at least for me, I found that it was easier to get caught in a sense of alienation from that bigger picture, to feel incredibly small and tiny and insignificant within that big picture, and actually, ironically, to feel a little bit disconnected from that sense of divinity. Because if the divinity is kind of the whole, then it's easy to kind of feel like, as a tiny individual as part of that whole, that we can get a little bit lost, and that we're a little bit kind of just this tiny little separate component that cannot kind of connect with that whole. A couple of years ago, kind of midway through my spiritual journey, I would say, I had a bit of a breakthrough when I started to read more about Buddhism, and I will flag that this is another video I will make. I'll talk a little bit more about Buddhism later down the line, but that's something that I want to kind of leave until I've really thought through what I want to address in that video. After kind of reading a little bit about Buddhism, a little bit more than I had previously, just having that at the back of my mind, and having developed a meditation practice, that was kind of vaguely kind of Zen, Buddhist inspired, like vaguely inspired by that kind of meditation practice. I had a bit of a breakthrough in starting to focus on the concept of awareness or consciousness, and broadening that awareness or consciousness. And through kind of developing a meditation practice which helped me to still my mind and to broaden my awareness outside of the sort of chatter that goes on in my head, I really started to understand in a more visceral way the interconnectedness between myself and everything else in cosmos, between myself and the rest of this sacred process that we are a part of. And probably the strongest, most transformative religious experience that I had on my journey so far was a very, very simple one, where I was walking on a quiet path amidst some trees, and I just suddenly was hit with this overwhelming understanding, and it was stronger than a conscious understanding, because the thought had already occurred to me. I was already familiar with the thought. But it was more of a kind of an experience of that thought, which was that I was everything, and everything was part of me. It's one of those kind of experiences that's impossible to put words on adequately, but I was looking at the trees and I just had this overwhelming sensation that the kind of awareness that I think of as being me, as being my sense of self, that wasn't just restricted to my body, mind, brain, but that I was channeling a much greater awareness, a greater cosmic awareness through this particular brain and this particular body. And that there was no division, either materially or in terms of that sense of awareness between myself and those trees. And in this kind of flash of illumination, I just saw the Big Bang and the development of this universe that we're in, and just had this very strong sense of there being no separation between myself and anything else in cosmos, particularly because it all came out of that one tiny point. And how could there be any serious division between myself and anything else when everything had come out of this one singularity? But what I have found over the years is that feeling is difficult for me to hold on to, especially when I'm just coming at my worldview from a pantheistic perspective. What I really need, alongside the understanding that the universe is divine, the universe is God, alongside that, I seem to require a very strong reminder and belief in the interconnectedness between everything on a micro level. So an awareness of that, an awareness of the extent of that, the extent to which we are all weaved into one web. And also the sense that everything around me is just as aware as I am. So I know this is a bit of a contentious issue, and it depends on how you define awareness or consciousness, and I'm not going to deny that humans have a very particular form of consciousness that other forms of material and life don't seem to have, but the more I learn about consciousness, the more I have seen that, you know, there is a scientific consensus increasingly that there's a very slippery line between sort of human consciousness, primate consciousness, other animal consciousness, and so on. It's really just a chain, and there isn't really a very clear division between the kind of consciousness that we experience and the kind of consciousness that other forms of life experience. It's really just all on this spectrum. And the thing that has always made most intuitive sense to me, whether it's kind of scientifically viable or not, is that why would awareness arise out of nothing? If my brain is aware, my brain is made of stardust, it's made of the same matter as everything else in this universe, then everything else must be aware also, or has the potential for awareness. And I have talked about that a little bit in previous videos, but I think recently, thinking about animism and reading texts about animism and animists and focusing on that as a philosophy or a mindset or a worldview, a way to think about divinity, has been very important for me to kind of tap into those kind of thoughts and that kind of way of seeing things, because animism is so much more microcosm than pantheism, just from my own experience. It's very much placing import on acknowledging and being aware of just the personhood of other animals, of other life forms, and just the fact that our sense of awareness and consciousness is not just limited to us, and we are not alone. We are not alone in this cosmos, looking back on it, that everything else in cosmos is having its own kind of aware experience too. Everything else is responding and having relationships as well as us. It's not just us doing this kind of weird thing alone in the universe. Everything in the universe, everything on this planet is doing the same thing in its own way. And so I feel like going forward, I'm really going to want to develop an interplay between animism and pantheism. So to really kind of develop my thoughts on animism, and to use that to reinvigorate and strengthen my pantheism. Now for me, I'm very much a monist, I'm not a dualist, so when I say animism I mean really I'm focusing on, like I say, the concept of awareness, and awareness to me is not something, it's not something that is separate from the material of my physical body. Awareness for me is just part of my physical experience and part of everything else's physical experience. So, you know, everything in the universe to me is material, but it is also aware, or I hesitate to say conscious, but you know, that's another word that I can throw out there. So it's not for me about believing in souls or spirit or some sort of substance or type of reality that is separate from the material. It's about understanding the material as itself being aware, being imbued with awareness. So yeah, I read a book by David Abrams, one or the other. I'll put a link below actually to that book. I think it's called The Spell of the Sensuous. Something like that. I'll put a link in the description box. I read that quite a few years ago, and I would like to maybe reread that book and read some more of his work, because he's a very interesting academic scholar who essentially writes about animism from an environmental kind of perspective. Very interesting stuff there. There's a lot of stuff that I want to kind of get my teeth into and really explore some of the animist texts that pagans are engaging with, and to see how that can kind of interplay with my pantheism. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. Like I say, this is something that I want to unpick and explore more in my own mind more as I go forward, and I will make more videos as I develop that. But that has just been really instrumental to me to getting back into a sense of being spiritual and a sense of reverence and so on. That's really been kind of where it's at for me right now, and I think it's really going to help me as I move forward and really reinvigorate my practice and really start to do stronger, more moving, more transformative rituals and things like that. I'm really looking forward to bringing those ideas as well more into the poetry that I write for ritual and so on.